Hello, 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 hello. It is your good friend, Wild Philosopher, here once more to remind you that gnomes are real. I have with me Hound and Ryan, and tonight we will be engaging in a discussion. Tonight we'll be talking about political philosophy. Now, political philosophy is interesting. And I bring this up because a lot of people have no interest in politics. I think that's fine. Actually, I think that's excellent. I fully support your almost complete apoliticism. Uh, and a lot of people, on the other flip side, seem to treat politics as separate from other fields. That is less fine. And the reason we'll be talking about political philosophy tonight is there have been a lot of fairly major errors in logic, in morality, in pedagogy, in modern day political philosophies that have, what would you call it, like blustered through like some sort of demoniac wind, and like the plague winds of medieval medicine have infested and slaughtered everyone they touch, whether those people are interested in or even aware of political discourse. That is the context in which we will be discussing whether or not things such as the Matrix or red pilling or the phenomenon that tends to get called woke. I'm going to be using intersectionality because that's the more precise term that proponents prefer. Whereas I think I like woke about as much as I like alt-right. Not at all. But yeah, whether the type of, I don't want to call it political revelation, but almost, revelatory method of doing politics.
Political gnosis.
Well, so in the middle of the last century, there was a political theorist called Eric Voegelin. And I could just totally butcher that pronunciation. And Voegelin claimed that a number of modern day political philosophies, including fascism, Marxism, I want to say feminism, which certainly could have fit on there, but he may not have bothered because of its lack of intellectual rigor. And even liberalism itself were Gnostic. I think there's a couple problems with this. One is I think he's being way too universal, and we'll be getting into this when I talk about, say, the difference between intersectionality and red pilling. Two is I think revelation is simply intrinsic to all human thought, and he's trying to sort of blame these things on like Gnosticism, but really they're just more universal. Which isn't to say it's never a problem, but the problem with, say, revelatory modes of thinking and liberalism is less the existence of revelatory modes of thinking and liberalism, and more the fact that that the nature of that revelation is such as to occlude to the liberal, say, the existence of others, which I think is problematic given what liberalism claims to be able to do, i.e. provide a basis for difference. Does that make sense, or should I elaborate?
That makes sense.
It works. I think it works.
Yeah. So, last few, as I said, Voegelin, who I'm not a big fan of for reasons which should become clear as we go throughout this presentation, but I'll use him as a launching off point. Voegelin talks extensively about what we might think of as political revelation, or specifically in an esoteric sense of doing politics. Esoteric or occult as in hidden. I have no religious motivations here. I just mean in the sense of hidden or secret knowledge, where the political theorist behaves less like an individual debating phenomenon and more like somebody claiming secret information that is known to themselves through certain initiations. Such knowledge is universal, or sorry, claims to such knowledge, I should say, are universal. They're the basis of Buddhism, the basis of Hinduism, the basis of Christianity, basis of most of the mystery religions. They show up routinely in Judaism and so on and so forth, but very rarely in politics, shall we say. Or the question is, should they show up in politics? And is there any merit? And I think this is an especially important question because the last decade of politics have just been dominated by esoteric discourses. Right. You have I know how you don't like the word woke. I don't like the word woke either, at least as a useful descriptor. But the origin point of the term, i.e. before it got co-opted and became a pejorative, the original meaning was somebody who is awakened to the realities of oppression.
Yeah, you're awakened to see the social issues.
Yeah, that's where the word woke. I mean, it's ebonics, right?
Yeah,
it's okay. I know sometimes stuff gets retroactively ebonicized, usually deleteriously to all involved, like the whole hand clapping thing. But in this case, I'm pretty sure, yeah, this was originally a term in ebonics, got picked up by specifically intersectional activists, intersectionality being the theory that reality as we understand it consists of intersecting matrices of oppression, hence the name of their sect, intersectional or intersectionalist. And the intersectional theory claims that once you are awakened to this via the famous metaphor for this is called the birdcage. It shows up in a little essay by Marilyn Frye called Oppression. I always recommend this essay to people because reading this essay will enlighten you to the structure of so many conspiracy theories out there. But yeah, Frye's argument is, of course, that if you're just engaging in regular empirical analysis, you will never see the universal and absolute nature of oppression. But if you conceive of reality as an intersecting sort of bird cage, where everything that exists is strands of wire in the cage, then you can understand how the bird is enchained. And this allegory told by Frye, I mean, obviously she's just one of many individuals, but it's representative of the type of logic that becomes endemic to later intersectionality. And then, when did the Red Pill movement come into existence? Not the pickup art, because originally it was pickup artists, right? It was. I want to say it was either before. It was slightly before the first 2016 election. I don't know how many. Couple of years, I think.
I think 2014, 2013 at the earliest.
Yeah. It started as a if I remember my lore, it started as a term amongst pickup artists and individuals in the manosphere as to the being red pilled on the reality of woman and the way our sort of gynocentric society functions to privilege female interests, which is you can sort of see as just a pretty straight adaptation of Frye's argument with the genders reversed.
Yeah.
And then from there, it gets, funnily enough, it gets broadened just like Frye broadened her argument. Well, actually, Frye herself later became an intersectional theorist and wrote about the interrelationship between female and black, and I think she was a lesbian activist too. So I think gay got tossed in there. Very red pill phenomenon, very similar. It eventually gets connected to a whole slew of theories, stuff like the cathedral, which describe society as my favorite metaphor, which was told to me by I want to say a proponent, because I think he eventually came to accept that the red pill is garbage, but he converted to radical Islam as a result. So I don't know what you'd call that shift. But yeah, eventually, like he called it like seeing society as a many-armed octopus, out to choke the life out of you, basically. There's that exceedingly popular image of that weird bulbous Jew with the octopus tentacles that you see all over Twitter that I think almost perfectly sums up the idea in one image. This theory I've mentioned before on this channel, and I'll mention again that the actual postulates of this theory come from Theodore Adorno's notion of the culture industry, which is his notion that in order to better oppress people, capitalism it switched from using the explicit. So Adorno, Marxist theorist, at least that's what he's best known for. But obviously, like Marxism is about as diverse as Protestantism, with its 30,000 competing sects, and so we want to go a little deeper, other than just labeling the guy a Marxist. Adorno's specific theory, which he was best known for, is this idea of the culture industry, which is in order to better control society, capitalism switched from oppressing people through the exercise of force to oppressing people through cultural modalities, basically. So Adorno interprets the sort of like the entertainment industry, arts and music, Hollywood, etc., to the news, because the news and academia are, in a sense, forms of entertainment. I know it sounds a little paradoxical to state that, but if you look at how academics function, you will notice there is a fairly major divide between like some of what people are doing on the real inside versus academic entertainers like Dan McClellan and Francesca Stavrakopoulou, who aren't really producing useful research or correct research or anything remotely accurate. But oh boy, are they popular. Like McClellan, I discovered yesterday, has 800,000 followers on TikTok. Yay. That's delightful. And Adorno's, get back on topic. Adorno's central theory is that these industries have been co-opted to such an extent. I'm trying to remember if he was the one who began talking about the degree to which Marxism had become capitalistic. That might have been later. But it was certainly Adorno's followers who first articulated that point. That even resistance becomes fashionable. So without getting too much into, I guess, the controversial weeds here, back in 2016 when Trump was elected, there was that whole the resistance or whatever. And they kept comparing themselves to like Harry Potter and the rebels from Star Wars. And there was this massive, massive boom in like what you call corporate paraphernalia catering to these people. And it was interesting that it was resistance refracted through consumerist identity was the meme. Not just, I mean, you saw this meme from the right. You also saw it from Marxist theorists. Now, central to all of these theories that I've just discussed is the notion of a political awakening, which is defined by its ideological content. So I guess to elaborate on this, all initiatic awakenings have some philosophical content, but what makes modern awakenings, I don't want to say unique, because you will see this show up time and again throughout human history. Like confessionalist Christianity, I think, is the exact same. Certain forms of, like, I was talking with an acquaintance about certain forms of Haredi Jewry. You have this going on. So it is, in some sense, it's universal, but its spread is definitely more unique. Or its spread today is more unique. It becomes a full system that you get awoken to, which is very distinct from earlier forms of initiation, where it's simply certain features of reality or ways of being, which we'll return to again later when we talk about the parameters and differences of esoteric awakenings. Whereas in the modern, it's just entire worldviews. It is entire worldviews coming out, and the liberation that you experience is from a different false worldview, which I think, Ryan, is where you're getting the Gnostic, eh? Earlier?
Not really, no.
Oh, my bad.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Because
the Voigelin's comparison here with the Gnostic is a sort of built off. To be fair to the guy here, because I am, as I said, I'm going to be criticizing him. Let's just be very clear here that he wrote his Gnosticism hypothesis like prior to most of the major archaeological finds of the 20th century on Gnosticism. So I'm giving features of Gnosticism he could not possibly have known. Antique Gnosticism was not defined as a. It was just an awakening into knowledge. It was not an awakening from a false worldview as much as it was from like a paucity of a worldview. It was the sort of worldly like existence for money or whatever. There are later Gnostic texts that are, in a polemical sense, try to connect this to Judaism and Orthodox, what we would, or proto-Orthodox Christianity or paganism, but at core, it's Pauline style liberation from the worldly. With that being said, did any of you have anything you wanted to add on before I continued?
Nope.
No? Anything from you? Because I've just been going steady for 20 minutes at this point.
Yeah, not much, no.
Okay. But yeah, clear so far?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. With that being said, I mentioned earlier that I think Voigelin's thesis is too all-inclusive. And I think you can really see this when you look at the difference between, like, what is the epistemic, so epistemology, the study of how we acquire knowledge, which will include everything from scientific knowledge to revelatory knowledge to transformations affected by exceptionally groovy music, a la Confucius. What is the epistemic difference between I guess the red pill and intersectionality? I guess so.
Yeah. So what is your thesis on this?
Okay? That's my thesis. The red pill, it very much gets its roots, not really in the right. It gets its views in some of the more, what you call, like, liberal, skeptic, individualist camps. A lot of the people active in this movement were earlier active in most of that stuff. And like most of those movements, it very firmly believes in the fact value or the object-subject distinction. The two are distinct, but often tend to be de facto equated. And what this means is it's an the ideology that gets revealed to you is one of the objective world, right? Like, interpretation does not exist in most of these philosophies, and Andrew Tate, it just has no existence, all but explicitly. Like, his whole thesis, we've spoken before on this channel about how Tate harps on and on about how man is defined by his man is defined by his use. He's defined by his what we would call instrumentality. As a man, you're not going to be treated. You're not going to be given unconditional love. You're not going to be treated as a person outside of your use. That is his very explicit major thesis, which I could bring up, like we could go to his Twitter account and read dozens of tweets, word for word on this one topic. We will not to save everyone's brain cells. If I could be a little rude there. Tate just let's just agree with him for the moment that this is an accurate understanding of the status of men in Western society. And I actually do agree with him. I just am not satisfied with treating myself that way. Even if in practical terms, that's how I have to operate to like make money. But Tate eschews a broader interpretation, and he's not really interested in either redefining what it means to have use, right? Or recontextualizing what it means to be a man. I don't just mean this in some weird, like, anti-realist way. I mean this, he's not interested in building anything more useful. He just wants to take the cringe that's already there and, like, glorify in it because it's the easiest way to make large quantities of money. In his own words. Or all but own words. On the flip side, the same cannot be said about intersectionality, because intersectionality has its roots in academia, specifically French academia from the 60s as interpreted by their American contemporaries. And I want to emphasize that subclause there, as interpreted by, because I find people, they focus too much on the French academics and they neglect, like, we are not following Deleuze as Deleuze wrote, or Derrida as Derrida wrote, or Foucault as Foucault wrote, because many of these thinkers held political or epistemic or social theories which are very distinct from how they're followed in the West, or sorry, the English-speaking West. We are following how they were interpreted by American political theorists in the 60s, most of whom did not share their ideological concerns. So there is, in fact, a fairly major divide between Foucault, the French Foucault, and the American Foucault. Let's just bracket that, just going forward, and we'll be focusing here on the American Foucault, who is not necessarily the French Foucault. I know this may sound pedantic, but just so I'm not having people being like, but Foucault didn't say that. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff Foucault didn't say that he's accused of saying. As much as I don't like the guy, he gets a lot of flack he did not believe. Among them, it is salient to note that the idea that, like, there is no such thing as reality, and everything is like relativistic. Everything is sort of relativistic. Foucault would not have liked that. He would not have liked that because Foucault was still a committed revolutionary. And you cannot be a committed revolutionary if you're a hardline relativist. I'm just going to break your... Like, if you don't have objective values, you cannot launch a revolt on behalf of the values you don't have. I'm just going to break your little hearts there. Sorry about that, folks. Yeah. Anywho, these theories place an immense stress on interpretation. Like, you see this with the birdcage phenomenon earlier. Fry agrees that if you're just looking at reality, you are not, and trying to create a pattern and draw from repeat. So the stereotype of how the scientific endeavor works, and it's not quite accurate, but let's just accept it for the moment, is I have 100 data points, I plot them on a graph, and then I draw a line, I guess, through the concentration, and that gives me my correlation, which is not my causation, but is still the basis of my later studies. Right. Fry rejects that. She is explicitly giving you the line beforehand. And then the data points will be reinterpreted to fit that line because this line has been revealed through the interpretation. So there is a major difference here between, like, on the one hand, the red pill or Tate revealed object and the revealed interpretation of intersectionality, which is another divergence, I guess, between modern political esotericism and ancient ideologies is Gnosticism was not an interpretation in the Gnostic and Christian sense is secondary from revelation. Right. This is why Christianity has philosophers and theologians and doesn't just have revelators or whatever. They are interpreting the theology and ethics and eschatology and whatnot of Jesus Christ. Right. Which you would know more about patristics than I, Hound. Is that how they approach tradition?
Could you clarify?
So, as religious thinkers, we understand revelation to be in the object, and interpretation is something that occurs in man. And the goal of man as a philosopher is to purge the receptacle, which is just a Greek term for the human body / soul, to make it more receptive to the divine. And the original Christian understanding of original sin, for instance, is God has to help with that interpretatory push because man won't do it alone. This is what the original meaning, as I understand it, of original sin is, that man he cannot purge his interpretation to make him receptive by himself. Once God gets started, man is capable of assisting, which is going to be where the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox diverge from the Calvinist, or at least from stereotypical memes about Calvinists.
Yeah, I think the issue is kind of, I'm not sure if it's any interpretation as much as discussion of the will, of the freedom of the will, where man's will has liberty, but it needs to be freed from bondage in order to begin pursuing the good.
Yeah, but that is a form of interpretation.
All right.
I know this might sound a little weird, but the interpretation is an act of the will.
All right.
Sorry, at least in the classical sense. So I guess you're just that'll be the more precise meaning. But tradition in the you know your patristics a little better than I do, at least when tradition in the, say, Eastern Orthodox sense it's not going to be about revelation, because neither the Catholic Church nor the Eastern Orthodox claim the capacity to produce new scriptures. I was under the impression it was mostly about interpretation.
Yeah.
That whole binding and loosing. Yeah. And that's going to be where intersectional theorists diverge heavily from classical theories of revelation. It's not the phenomena that's or in this case, the scripture, the life of Jesus, right, as the supreme truth of the world. It's the revelation, or the interpretation that becomes revealed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I guess we've been going over, mostly giving biographical details and clarificatory points. And I have been noting consistently throughout this essay, or this mostly monologue at this point. Sorry about that. That I think there are correspondences between a lot of these theories and earlier theories in Christianity or in Judaism, or we won't touch in the you can I could extend this case to the Indian and Chinese traditions. I won't do so too much because I think their relationship, well, actually there's a pretty decent relationship between Indian religions and modern politics thanks to the New Age, but I guess maybe we will go slightly more into them. But I guess it can go on from there and take a little bit more of a dive. And I'm not critical of this. let's be clear here that Voigelin makes his argument critically, but there have been other political theorists, Schmidt, arguably Strauss, a whole bunch of others who have talked about the centrality of revelation to who we are as human beings, as not just as human beings, but as zoon politikon, as political animals, in a more positive sense, or at least a neutral one. I think the issue is less the existence of revelation in politics and more the way that that revelation is interpreted or understood or presented.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you become blind to the fact that you have a revelation.
All right.
This one one of the conflict theory is the worst here. It is so have either of you two ever heard of conflict theory?
I think I've heard of it in passing.
Yeah, the Marxist branch of sociology, explicitly Marxist. This isn't me being rude. It is a openly Marxist branch of sociology, which understands relationships between groups as being rooted purely in, it's in the name, conflict. When two groups relate in any way, they relate through conflict. Whether we're talking about classes or religions or genders or race or whatever. It's extreme violence, the sociological theory. And most of the conflict theorists I've met over the years have been absolutely furious at the notion that other people might not adhere to conflict theory. And they've explicitly phrased it as like, I cannot stand when people pretend not to believe in conflict theory. And I'm like, no, I just think you're full of crap. Like, I fully understand what you were trying to communicate. You were just wrong. That's when revelation tends to become an issue. It would look similar to some of those, I guess, Christian theories. That's like everyone, and you really see this with some of the really weird Christian or Islamic theories, where it's like everyone knows that Jesus is the Messiah / Muhammad is God. You're just all in denial. It's like, no, everyone does not know that. That might be true. Those not to say none of these theories are true, just that everyone does not know that. This is not knowledge all people have.
Mm-hmm. All right. I mean, it feels like it makes sense. But
yeah.
Can't just assume everybody knows what you do.
Yeah.
Whether what you know is right or wrong.
No, yeah, it's not even assuming you're correct. It's just not useful.
You can if you want to make yourself feel better.
Yeah, a lot of these things. Sometimes there might be a basis for this. Maybe it's for instance, I think it's probably the case that we all have intrinsic knowledge that other people are real. I think solipsism is a choice. But I do think that a lot of people who harp on about this stuff are definitely more interested in hyping up themselves or making themselves feel more self-righteous than they are in actually getting other people to, in this case, stop being solipsists.
Mm-hmm.
Because maybe he does have that intrinsic knowledge that other people are real, but he has very successfully buried it, and you just pretending he's living in denial is not helping him at all.
Yeah.
And I use that example because I think it's pretty unequivocal that most of us are happier when we live in a world with other people than when we live in a hell of our own devising. Anywho, back on target, I noted there were I want to say correspond, like what we would call isomorph or morphic, which is a fancy schmancy word meaning structural parallels that don't necessarily have a similarity of content. But isomorphic parallels between how these political theories function and how a lot of religious theories function. And again, I say this neutrally. I fully believe you cannot extricate the two from each other. And I mentioned it's a problem when people don't acknowledge that. I'm going to go. So last Sunday you and I talked about ideology, and did we mention on stream that we wanted to crap all over Orwell again?
Yeah, I think so.
We did. Okay, so this is nothing new to the regular subscribers that we're, yeah. So George Orwell, best known for 1984 and Animal Farm, during his lifetime, best known for his cause or his fervent commitment to the cause of international socialism. Very fervent, like he was actively involved in the Spanish Civil War, for instance. So he was not an armchair political theorist. He had actually seen political and participated in political revolution. And he's best known for his fiction nowadays, but and maybe in his lifetime that may have been what he was best known for too. But he was probably, I won't say better known for the immense amount of literature he wrote about socialism.
Quick question: was he a like world orderist?
He's very weird, because he wants all of the elements of socialism.
Yeah.
But he doesn't want Stalinism, and I think I think Orwell is in immense denial about, and when this is classical socialism here, which doesn't actually have too many adherents nowadays, so this isn't all that relevant to anyone you see defending socialism nowadays. I think much of Orwell's political theory is him wrestling with the inherent contradiction between the principles of his worldview and their inevitable consequences.
Oh, I see.
So he would say no. I would agree with him, but I'm not really sure. Like, other than vague appeals to freedom and whatever, there's not really a reason to think his philosophy would avoid what happened with Stalinism. And this isn't necessarily true nowadays because socialist theories were substantially revised in the 60s and 70s. So originally they're hyper-industrialist, right?
Yes.
Marxism is and so Marxism and socialism are industrialist philosophies, which very much are committed to the view that the industrialism of the 19th century would continue. And in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, that just proved false. Industrialism, not that we deindustrialized, but we went beyond industrialism and underwent new shifts in society, and both the intensely, what would you call it, white collar. Most Westerners do not work in industrial jobs. This is even more so true since we sent them all overseas. Most Westerners do not work in white collar, or they do not work in blue collar jobs. They work in vaguely white collar ones.
Well, yeah, they're all desk jobs, clerk jobs.
Yeah, especially modern day socialists who are almost all bureaucrats. And then you also had mounting awareness. Like, the climate crisis is not a feature. It shows up in a few highly quixotic, idiosyncratic socialist theorists, like theosophist L. Frank Baum and was it Albert Wallace, the guy who co-discovered the theory of evolution with Darwin, but never got any credit because he was a spiritualist and thought he could talk to the spirits of the dead. I want to say it was Alfred Russel Wallace, Albert Russel Wallace. It was Alfred Russel Wallace, yeah. So they were very active in pinpointing, as was the anarcho-communist William Morris. So full credit to those people for picking up on the climate crisis before it really got going societally. Orwell not so aware of that. He is vague, like it vaguely shows up, but it's not a major feature, and he's still in the sort of classical socialist industrial worldview. All of which is to say that while we're about to pillory Orwell, I'm not sure we can derive anything useful about modern day forms of socialism from that complaint.
All right.
Yeah. Which isn't I don't like socialism, but like let's just be honest about the extent of our arguments here. Especially because like the biggest socialist in America right now, though maybe not the most effective, Naomi Klein, argues that we should endorse socialism is because it's an anti-industrial philosophy that'll save the climate. Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah. Anywho, Orwell wrote a very famous series of papers called Notes on Nationalism, and I'm going to pick on this paper because I think it is a perfect example of what happens when you try to take spirit or religious theories that describe human nature as a totality and then try to fit them into political frameworks. Because this is my issue with a lot of intersectional theories, but I'm getting ahead of myself there. Because Orwell, he wants to write a book about the evils of nationalism. What is his definition of nationalism? Okay, his definition of nationalism, I was hoping we'd have some fun guesses so I could tell you were wrong, but not going to get tricked by a wild philosopher today. Orwell's definition of nationalism is when you love something, not some nation, something so much you refuse to disagree there might ever be a problem with it. Like, this is his open explicit, his word, I almost want to say his word for word, although it's been a few years since I read it, his almost word for word definition. Now I'm not a nationalist. I don't like nationalism, but like, let's just be clear here that this is not nationalism. Yeah, at all. This is just a very common character failing that you can have totally irrespective of what your political theory happens to be and whether or not you like your nation. Like you can see this sort of with the real communism has never been tried people, right? That are you going to accuse them of nationalism? No, probably not. But Orwell, he takes this definition that is very obviously a definition of character traits or character flaws, and then he aggressively applies it to a whole bunch of actual nationalist theories. So he's wildly equivocating between all these political theories and his character flaw. And the outcome is, ironically enough, that he ends up almost committing himself to the exact same position. I think he even includes, I'm trying to remember if he includes Stalinism as a variant of nationalism. He might. It was hard to say. It's been a while. But yeah, like somewhat ironically, it's like he just dumps all these things into nationalism. Anyone who has read, forget what you know about modern nationalism, if any books by nationalists active when Orwell was alive, and at his most active 30s, the 30s and the 40s, one of the things that will become astonishingly clear is most of the nationalist thinkers at the time virulently hated their own countries. They thought they were degenerate and sodden and dominated by Jews or some other words I can't use because they're slurs, or certain foreigners, like other European peoples, not the Jews, like Cornelia Codreanu, for instance, whose name I probably just mangled. Like his whole For My Legionnaires is a 300-page rant about how much he hates Romania. And yet, anyone who knows anything about the guy knows very fervent nationalists. So, like, none of what Orwell says gets off the ground, but he successfully confused a character flaw with a political doctrine. And I want to pick on this, not because I think most people nowadays follow Orwell, because other than people tweeting about how some neologism introduced by a hatchet job bureaucrat is 1984 newspeak, you are never going to see anyone using Orwell's actual philosophy for any reason, unless they're... No, I used to see people on Reddit appealing to him vaguely, but that was years and years ago. He's probably too moderate for people nowadays. Too moderate and reasonable. We can't stand that. Anywho, a lot of later theories, however, continue this sort of attempt to fit. I kept using religious. I almost think, like, what you call metaphysical. I've never found a good word for it, like metaphysical anthropology. Like the nature of man and the universe. Well, what would you call that? Would metaphysical anthropology be a good label?
I don't know.
Like when we say things like the perfected man is the... Okay, how would I put it? I'm going to step back for a moment here. For those who don't have much knowledge of religion, modern day, like when you see religions discussed nowadays, they tend to be discussed in terms of like their belief about God and does God exist and whatnot. Historical religions, however, were defined, not to say that God was not very important, but the central element of historical religions was rather man's role in the cosmos and his relation to God / the gods, if you were a polytheist. So to give you a very good example here, a lot of Sufi and Shiite Muslims in their theology preached that existence was the Nur Muhammad, the light of Muhammad, and because Muhammad was Al-Insan al-Kamil, the complete person or the perfected person, and the saint or the Sufi saint / Shiite saint is sort of undergoing a metamorphosis into Muhammad. He exists within the Nur Muhammad and he embodies Muhammad's character traits. So it is a theology, but it's almost like a mystical or metaphysical anthropology. And this is building off of the sort of like Jesus as the second Adam, which is the same thing but for Christians. And you think that Jesus is God and not just cosmic man, which is Islamic Muhammad. You get this with Lao Ji, and you get this with Confucius is the incarnation of the Tao in the thought of Dong Zhongshu and the Zhuangzi school, and most medieval Confucian or what we would think of as medieval Confucian schools. You get this with early Taoism and Lao Ji, and so on. Like a lot of religions could be understood as philosophical or theological anthropologies, studies of man. This gets like Orwell, not a religious thinker, and so he's reformulating and shuffling all this through politics, and thus a otherwise perennial character flaw, which is the inability, like what Orwell's definition of nationalism is the inability to reflect on your own positions. Right. Very common character flaw. No shame if you have it. I think all of us have that one to some extent. Which, I guess to put it another way, you could say we're all nationalists inside. And you see this with intersectionality, where they're trying to reify a lot of the things that intersectional theorists try to read through the lens of race or gender are universal character flaws that everyone has.
All right.
Like standpoint theory, which is a branch of intersectionality it's a branch of feminist theory that plays into modern day intersectionality. Gets started 60s or 70s. Probably really started in the 70s. Standpoint theory argues that privileged people lack self-awareness by virtue of their being privileged, whereas minority people who have to navigate the nature of a hegemonic society have awareness not just of themselves, but of this hegemonic society, which means that if the privileged person has zero knowledge, the oppressed person has like 2 knowledge, because he's knowledge of herself and knowledge of the privileged person. This is mostly a load of crap, because like the reason quote unquote privileged people don't have knowledge of themselves is just because most people don't have knowledge of themselves. And the reason they don't have knowledge of others isn't because they're oppressing those others. It's just because most of us struggle to have knowledge of others, because that's a learned skill. On the flip side, just being a minority person does not give you that knowledge. Like it is very much a skill and has to be intentionally learned. And you can even see how many people don't have it if you look at the writings of like standpoint theorists themselves, where they're not articulating 2 different worldviews. They're just articulating their own worldview on like in a mirror image. But they're also being incredibly unself-reflective about it. I think part of the issue here is a lot of these individuals were secular Jews. I'm not saying this like I am Jewish, and I think a lot of them were not aware that Jews' abilities to negotiate those divides is not because we have magic powers. It's because that was an explicit goal of rabbinic education for the last 2,000 years in order for us to interact with Romans and Christians and other people while in exile. But not in some mystical, magical, or superior. It's just a skill that you have to patiently learn. And there's instructions on how to do it in like the Talmud and most late major rabbinic philosophies. And so after Jews were secularized, we just preserved it as part of the education system. But it's certainly not a magical feature. And it's something, even today, I don't actually think most Jews have it because of the collapse of Jewish pedagogy. But historically, it was historically there, but as a skill, as a learned skill. And nor was it something that non-Jews didn't have. They just had acquired it differently and in different conditions. But anywho, sorry, back on target. Like it's very much a skill, like to know how others' worldview differs from your own, and it's a learned skill. But the lack of that skill is a character flaw, and to be clear, it's only a character flaw to the extent that you actually interact with other people or talk about them. Like if you hold absolutely barmy views on Hinduism, but you've never met a Hindu in your life, it would be difficult to say you're committing some major sin. If you then go and produce an entire broadcast on Twitter about how Hinduism has a poop Eucharist and this isn't acknowledged because of a Jewish plot to bring poop eating to America, that's when it becomes a problem, and that's when you're Stu Peters. But normally it's just what like we all hold weird views that we just sort of get half cocked, and that's just a part of being human. Anyway, so I decide to tie all this together because we've been going on for about 50 minutes now, and this will show up again when we present. Like our initial question here was, is there knowledge in political philosophy? And I noted that most of the claims to esoteric knowledge they're systematic or ideological philosophies, and it's either the knowledge or the interpretation. But they tend to be what you call politicizations of, and I really wish there was a better word, because I keep having to use anthropology, and I'm guessing the listeners are trying to compare this to like study of man as a person, but not in the like scientific sense of I'm going to go out and study these rocks left by 2nd century cavemen in North Russia and see what this tells me about the Scythians or whatever. That was a totally nonsensical statement because I just said cavemen in the 2nd century, but forgive me.
You never know.
You never know. God, could you imagine? It's like, and here's the Scythians, and there's the Cimmerians, and over there is Thrug the Neanderthal. The obvious question from here is there an actual awakening that, or an awakening, or a red pilling? And I would actually like to argue, yes, with 5 asterisks after that yes. Yes. 10 asterisks, like 50 asterisks. Because somebody, how am I going to tell? How are we going to go about telling this so it sounds less? Okay, maybe let me put it another way. There is information you cannot pass to people, not because they're stupid, not because they're inferior to you, but because they have a mental blockage that prevents them from receiving that information. This doesn't have to be a profound piece of information. Like, you will notice if you go out in the world and you spend several years getting into philosophical conversations with people in a variety of contexts, so not in your academic department where everyone shares the same worldview on every topic, but out in the real world where there's a whole lot of worldviews, especially if you live in Europe or Canada or parts of East Asia. And you go out and talk, you will notice that people often have large blockages to information. And this is, we can lay aside controversial information here, such as the divinity of Jesus Christ, or whether black women are constrained by political information, and focus on very mundane, totally normal things that nobody should really be fighting over. Such as, for instance, the presence of Lilith in the Bible. I cannot count the number of people who have argued with me that Lilith appears in the book of Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's this Lilith, the whole Lilith narrative is in the book of Ryan, you've met those people, right?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah, they are just everywhere. Thanks to, like, weird Wiccan and some of the stranger feminist stuff. Like, for anyone listening to this going, but doesn't she, like, open your Bible, read 2 pages, it takes, what, 2-3 pages to ascertain that there's no Lilith whatsoever. She ain't there. She was never there. The actual Lilith narrative is from a Jewish esoteric treatise called the Zohar, published in 12th century Spain. And even that is not meant to be understood literally, as the context makes very clear. I'm not going to say the context because it's fine if you understand its allegory. Understood literally, it would be blasphemy. Which is, again, my point. It's not a literal text. It is not a literal... Like, there are Zoharic literalists in academia, and I do not understand where they come from, because if you actually interpret the Zohar literally, you violate every principle of the Jewish faith. And then some. With that being, yeah, Lilith not in there, and yet people, like, they won't open the book. They won't read the book. Acknowledging this has no impact on anything, and they will fight you to the death. They will fight you to the death over the claim that Lilith is in the Bible and God punishes her because, like, he doesn't like women or something. They'll keep fighting you. And so you'll go on, and one of the things I guess I realized over the years is on this channel before I've mentioned, Han doesn't quite say this, but this is the summary of his. The purpose of a theory is to illuminate, not darken. Right. There are theories out there that just, they erase vast swaths of reality. Like, they reinterpret everything as politics and erase friendship and love and, the supernatural and whatever, or they interpret everything as economic, so like and reach similar conclusions, or they treat everything as instrumental, and I could go on and on, like or they deny the existence of a whole class of phenomena for one reason or another, say because they think that the Bible doesn't support germ theory. And these are sort of theories that they just erase reality. What we see becomes closed off. And then there's theories that illuminate. So when you approach a phenomenon, like theorizing is inevitable. You are not going to get away from having to interpret things. But there are theories that reveal, or theories that illuminate, I should say, and enliven rather than erase. And so rather than destroying the phenomenon, they let you appreciate it in more and more multifaceted ways. And there's a lot of these types of theories out there. You can approach these theories from most political or religious, or completely apolitical in your religious lenses. Like they absolutely exist. There's a link to my blog in the comments. I've been posting articles by the 100% real Caliandra Powderpuff Pixie, talking about human anti-realism. And she is very confirmed, 100% real Pixie, not a literary fabrication of my own devising. I know her IRL, even though she's a mystical pixie. And she is sort of having this enlivening theoretical discourse from the perspective of hardline. I guess she's not an atheist; she's an ahumanist, because she denies the existence of people. So yeah, you approach these theories from everywhere, and theories that, as I said, enlighten. And I would argue mostly on empirical grounds, which means it'll be difficult for me to present an argument in a YouTube video, because I can't give you empirical. I mean, I can give you a whole bunch of examples for like 3 hours, but I can't really give you empirical data. That awareness of reality, like the ability to use your eyes, is intimately connected to the heart. How are you engaging with the world around you? Are you engaging in a way as to darken or occlude or erase what Paul Ricoeur calls the hermeneutics of suspicion, which we'll get to again because it's a consistent feature of all these ideologies I've just discussed? Or are you approaching with what he calls the hermeneutics of, I'm going to use trust instead of faith to make it more secularly friendly, which is where you're engaged with the phenomena. You have opened your heart at the risk of sustaining a wound, right? Because when you open your heart, you risk being lanced. This is why people, like, sometimes you have to keep your heart closed because it's just too painful, unless you're a saint. But when you choose to trust someone, you put yourself at risk. This is the truth behind all those awful, like, grade 4 exercises where they tell you to close your eyes and fall backwards and hope that your feeble, harmed classmates don't accidentally drop you by mistake.
Good times.
Yeah, good times. Let's just say none of those exercises ever helped me build trust, because I kept ending up on the floor. But as I was saying, back on target, like I will argue on empirical grounds that there is a way of engaging. In order to fully open your eyes and see reality, you need to open your heart. You need to engage in that trusting relationship with the external world, and with yourself as an external entity, you might say, because in a sense our minds are foreign to us, at the risk of being wounded. Which means this is not. It does involve a philosophy, in the sense that I think, like, you cannot have explicit postulates against doing this, and you need to have explicit postulates in favor of doing this. but fundamentally, it's a way of being, or a way of living your life, rather than a philosophy or an ideology. And it does probably different. And I guess I didn't have this in the notes, but it occurs to me only now that I think one of the major differences between a genuine awakening and an ideology is the fact that you risk being wounded. Right, because everything I examined, like, they will not risk being wounded. I don't know. That's just me spitballing.
All right.
Does it make sense though, or like?
It does make sense. It does make sense.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Like most of these theories are they're structurally designed to avoid ever being disproven or challenged in any way. So yeah, I think I used I actually like the Chinese word heart mind for this reason, or jin. This is a continuous term in Confucian discourse. I really like it not because I think your heart actually can think. That would be cool. I have two brains and one of them pumps blood, but no. But a sort of thought of the heart. And you have to awaken the heart mind to awaken your eyes. But as I said, it's a way of being, it's a character. And the reason I'm so wary of modern esoteric theories in politics is none of them evince that. I don't know if either of you want to have anything to contribute here before I keep ranting.
Nope, it's fine. Rant away.
Hound?
Nah. I am quite good.
Good. He's playing Starbound in the background. Okay. But yeah, like if you look at all of these, so earlier in this video, I used the phrase like receptacle, in the sort of the body as a receptacle, and we talked about how the original understanding of original sin, the original sin, is that in order to become a receptacle, like in order to engage in that act of interpretatio of the divine, God himself, we need that primal encounter with the good, with God, but it needs to be on his end. I cannot do that, and that's the difference I would say between Christianity and like late Platonism, where you purge yourself as a receptacle and then the divine enters in. In Christianity, God has to participate in the purging.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's the difference between Plotinus and later Christian thinkers. And so we can think of this as transformation from within via an entry from without. Right? I've become foreign to myself, and so in order to return to myself, I need the foreign to enter into me, is how Iamblichus refers to it. And then you want to compare this nowadays, I mean, the stereotype of the individual off trying to red pill you is he goes on and on about how schizo he is. It's remember there were all those memes, and some of them were bloody, like memes and treaties and perspectives, and it's terms like schizo-spirituality, much of which is borrowed from the French Nietzschean Deleuze, Gilles Deleuze, not to be confused with JPF Deleuze, an absolutely wonderful botanist and magician who claimed to be able to channel the power of the planets with a magnet. We all like that guy because that guy was cool and never did anything bad to anyone, unlike Gilles Deleuze, who has ruined the lives of millions by being unutterably cringe. With that whole, like, he was the guy who really, I want to say he kickstarted, because the idea that schizophrenics had magic powers, that I'm trying to remember if he was the one who originated. He may have gotten that from other people and merely refined the notion. I'm trying to remember. I know it was it Rosenberg who first? It was Rosenberg who first originated the notion that witches were just wise women, so not him. But we'll just. There's probably somebody before Gilles Deleuze who asserted that schizophrenics had magic powers. Certainly, it is not a notion. I know you see this all the time nowadays. If any of you ever bother to study historical psychology on this subject and parapsychology, you will notice that schizophrenics actually have, laying aside for the moment the fact that schizophrenia is a very hard to define illness, its constitutive features tend to be a lack of ability to engage with the reality stemming from a false sense of self. And for this reason, interestingly enough, like let's just assume, for the sake of argument, we'll look at parapsychology, and I know some of you may have harsh views on that. That's fine. If you're schizo-spiritual, you probably like parapsychology, though. Parapsychologists prefer to try to do experiments with hardline atheist rational skeptics over schizophrenics, because they argue that all available evidence shows that having a normal and healthy personality makes you more receptive to the divine or to psychic phenomena, depending on how they want to describe it. And therefore, schizophrenics are just the worst, the least spiritual, or in the sense of like esoteric, not in the sense that there's not many pious, wonderful schizophrenic people out there. Like parapsychologists do not enjoy working with schizophrenics, and they prefer to work with skeptics. And if any of you have interacted with a skeptic talking about parapsychology, you can understand the intensity of what I just said. My major source here is Ullman and Krippner Dream Telepathy, which just you can ignore the portions I just read and focus in on the mental health bit, because they cite pretty extensively from mainstream literature too. But yeah, like if you look at most of these theories, you find exceptional emphasis on like schizophrenic states. You'll often find, I talked about like transformation of character. You'll often find there's a fanatical arrogance, total inability to self-reflect, amazingly dishonest behavior. The most notorious in respect to like intersectional theorists refusing to admit they have a philosophy and just taking it for granted, that like this is just the way the world is. Trust me, bro. But you also see this with a lot of red pillars trying to like it's so, I mean, in their case it's much more transparent, just sending you things they think are likely to convert you rather than like having an honest conversation. Inability, I think I mentioned inability to self-reflect. And then lastly, like I already mentioned, and your stress test for a lot of this stuff is if you correct them on an exceedingly mundane issue, will they go ballistic? Right? Like most of us are wrong on just a whole bunch of minor stuff. We can lay aside core beliefs. Right, like obviously if you challenge someone on their core beliefs, they will be very upset. Right. Like if somebody tells you we need to save the oppressed peoples of the earth and your response is oppression is a social construct, they are not going to be very happy with you. So don't do that. But if you if something comes up and you correct them on a minor issue and it has no bearing on the overall correctness of their philosophy, and they are just incapable of taking it, or in some cases go totally ballistic, then you can be fairly certain that the person is not in that state of receptivity to reality. Any interjections or comments from the peanut gallery?
That makes sense. It's
Yep.
you don't have an internal gaze, it's hard to let yourself be questioned.
Yeah. And as I said, you can I fully admit. I think basically everyone will get mad if you start challenging them on core beliefs, but
Yeah.
you can really see it with Pabula, because most people, I guess, I'll pick a couple. Not that I'm an amazing, I am a very flawed person. Few people know this as well as I do, but to give a couple examples from my own life here, I was convinced by Daniel Ogden's arguments that dragons lacked limbs. Ryan was like, no, they don't, and he brought up a whole bunch of examples. And then I went back and I examined Ogden's argument, which mostly rests on an argument, a reinterpretation of his exegesis of Beowulf, and I went, oh, Ogden is full of crap. No disrespect to the person. And I changed my mind. Right.
Oh,
This
I didn't
isn't
know
a
I convinced you.
Sorry.
I didn't know I changed your mind. You never told me that.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, in a few days we'll be doing dragons this Thursday. Eh? Yeah. If nothing goes wrong again, we will be doing, and I will not be saying anything when Ryan says that dragons can have legs. This was not a view I formerly had. Now, obviously, this isn't to my immense credit as a person, because this is completely in the grand scheme of things. What does it matter whether dragons have legs in folklore or just in iconography? Which is Ogden's argument is dragons were originally serpentine and received legs in iconography, and then it made its way into the folklore from there. Which is based mostly off hagiographies, and as I said, his exegesis of Beowulf. It was either The Dragon in the West or he's written 2 books on dragons. They're both very good. I do recommend, as I disagree with him on quite a few things, but I recommend both his books on dragons. But again, not a major belief, which is why this isn't. All this is to say is I am not as ridiculous as some people out there, which is not exactly a compliment giving the competition. I could pick. I had another example in mind earlier, and all of a sudden it's totally flown out of my head. But yeah, if you're listening to this, most of you, think about when somebody accused you of being factually wrong, just on the presence of Lilith in the Book of Genesis, and what was your emotional response? And let's just, if the person, obviously, if the person is a massive dickweed about it, then you will get upset for reasons that are ancillary, right? Which is one of the issues with the critical thinking movement, was they focused extensively on the logic of arguments to the complete extent of what we're actually doing when we have discussions, and thus they just showed up and randomly started screaming about fallacies in everyone's messages. Which is, they have a reputation for being dickweeds, and also a reputation for being astonishingly ineffective, because when you're rude to people, they don't want to listen to you.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
When I call people various pejoratives and slurs, that really makes them think, this person, I should really listen to them. I should respect their opinions.
Yeah. That
you illiterate slattern. Yeah.
And this has been the last 8 years of discourse. Is you had people saying you should cancel individuals for saying slurs.
Yep. Can you repeat that?
Sorry, I just got a very important message. So I had to sorry about that. Back on target. like if you look at the left, this is about a decade ago, they come out and they're like, you should face legal repercussions for saying slurs. Let's lay aside the moral question of whether or not that's accurate for the moment. And you had this response of, I am going to say as many slurs in your DMs as I possibly can to troll you. Like anyone who has spent any time on the internet has seen that guy who shows up. His name is like Mindfuhrer88. He has a picture of Alfred Rosenberg as his Discord or Twitter handle, and it is 500 N-words running. And he thinks he's being hilarious, and he's also thinking he's like, yeah, I'm angering you because you're such a lib or whatever. And it's like, no, you are angering me because you are being phenomenally rude, but I am going to forget your existence 15 seconds after I kick you out of the server. Same goes with, if any of you have spent any time in religious servers, there is a consistent issue with people trolling by posting LGBT corn. And they're like, I bet this offends you, Christians. And I'm like, this is just kind of rude, bro. Ban. Like, do you remember, you guys remember they were showing up after what was that song? What was the one about Lil Nas X? He released that song about like how he wants to go to hell because he's gay or whatever. What was it called again?
I don't remember. Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, I guess for months after that, I was having people show up and post clips from that, and they're like, I bet this offends you, and I'm like, no. I mean, it's not making me feel well disposed towards you. It's just, and then I would just ban them, and then a year later, I'd be looking at my block list, and I'd be like, who's this person? But sorry, back on target. Like if you actually have an awakening, and this is a pretty consistent feature across religions, and I know like this isn't going to be a compelling argument because I'm presenting by A, comparativism, and B, personal experience, which are like, oh yeah, that's an amazing argument for reality, but I a lot of the times you just cannot defend true things because you can only realize they're encountering them. And so I can give you instructions for how to encounter truth or undergo true experiences, but it's kind of difficult to argue for it. Maybe by negation, I could. But yeah, stuff like if you actually undergo an awakening, you should want to be more honest, like more, honestly, more, maybe not more trusting unilaterally, because it's totally legitimate. Like, don't trust the people on Twitter. Don't do it, bros. Don't trust the people on Twitter. A lot of really weird, like a lot of people are just way too aggressive or angry or nonsensical, and you just have to fence yourself off to them, unless you're a saint. But that's the old quote from Aristotle. And we are doing philosophy for us normal chaps and not for saints. So the quote from Aristotle is, the only person who can live without his fellows is an animal or a god.
All right. That makes sense.
But yeah, like if your so-called awakening leads you to be systematically dishonest to other people, to ways that like oftentimes just aren't even useful. There are so many misunderstandings about critical race theory and intersectionality and critical theory in general and postmodernism and post-structuralism that would have not existed at all if the people who held these theories were A, honest about holding them, and B, attempted to sincerely communicate them to people. Instead, prior to me having to discuss them, I have to backtrack half an hour and do like half an hour's useless conversation, clearing out misconceptions that have been willingly put into place. But none of this benefits any of the people who hold these views, because now everyone just holds really weird views on the people who believe these things and like hate their guts, right? And to the point that some of these things are just straight up used as like slurs in some quarters. And so whatever goal the people who believe these things were aiming to affect has just been totally buried. They buried it themselves by not choosing to trust, limited, like there's obviously going to be douchebags out there, but you cannot lie about your philosophy if you want people to follow it. And I don't just mean like follow as sheep, I mean actually follow it as a society. And then again, the arrogance and the inability to self-reflect is just a major issues that would incline me against the view that these are, whatever we might say about the esoteric in political philosophy, this is not it.
Aye.
Because if you have undergone that awakening of the heart, you should be aware of the heart. And did you guys have anything to add on at this juncture?
Not right now, no.
Nope, you're doing pretty good.
You're on fire.
Yeah, you're on fire.
Okay. Because we can
on fire. Sorry.
Because we can actually, like, if we want to talk about what would be the example of the genuine esoteric in politics, let's look at everyone's favorite religion, Islam. And we're going to, by Islam, I mean we're not looking at everyone's favorite. Yeah, we're going to look at Ismailism, or Ismaili Islam. Ismaili Islam, branch of Shiite Islam, your TLDR on Islamic philosophy. I mentioned earlier they have very different views on the nature of Muhammad. These different views feed into their view, what they think of the sheikh or the imam. In Shiite thought, the sheikh or imam comes to embody Muhammad in a way that the sheikh or imam doesn't in Sunni Islam, which is much more deistic, to use a possibly unapt comparison. Ismaili theory, which both borrows from and heavily reinterprets elements of Platonism, goes even farther, and it propounds a sort of, what you call it, mystical politics? Political soteriology? I don't even know what you would call this, where the Ismaili, the sheikh almost has to be a saint. In order to have, the term here for the term used for authority is walaya. I may have just totally mispronounced that. And in order to have that authority, walaya means guardianship. And this is the sort of guardianship of man in his role of sub-ruler or sovereign, suzerain ruler of creation. In order to get that authority, you have to almost embody divine. You have to embody divine man. And this isn't like you embody divine man so you get authority, which is how I'm reflecting it in the grammar. In the Arabic grammar, it's just all the same concept, right? Divine man is authority. The divine man becomes the law, and it's not that this is what gives him the authority to make jurisprudence. This is the authority to make jurisprudence. It's almost difficult to describe in English because it's all bounded together in the. I keep saying Arabic. A lot of this stuff is actually in Persian. But the major stuff is all in Arabic, and that's where they're getting the technical terms anyways. Sorry. Back on target. Rather, now laying aside anyone here, your views on, nobody listening to this should have views on Ismaili Islam, because I very much doubt any of you have met many it would be statistically speaking, like there's only a few million, so the odds that anyone listening to this channel is an Ismaili who actually knows Ismaili political theory is somewhat minute.
If you do, respect.
Yes, mad respect, bro. But you'll notice the main difference here is you cannot have you literally cannot have authority under Ismaili jurisprudence and be a dishonest, arrogant, unself-reflective, schizo whatever person. Not in the sense that like you have the authority wrongly or you're a bad. You just don't. If you are not, I want to say perfect, but as perfect as a human can get, so subject to whatever limitations you can put on, you just don't have the authority. Because you're not a divine man, because again, these two are the same, right? The divine man, now I will note, Ismaili is I won't say you're honest all the time, because the caliph of the Ismailis might live under persecution, which means he has to commit taqiyya, which is just lies to practice the Islamic faith in secret. But he does live in, I guess, an internally honest life, and he lives an honest life with his followers. He's not deceptively lying to people, which is why, historically speaking, a lot of, I cannot pronounce this word, the Islamic term for missionary, dai, which I think, or dai, I'm D-A-I.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Like, because I know I was studying some of the Islamic sects, specifically the assassins, and they had that.
Well, they were Ismaili, yeah.
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 Fun guys, fun people.
Yeah, it's kind of funny actually that Ismailism had its start in one of the most, I want to say vicious, but certainly one of the more extreme Islamic sects, the assassins, and yet they're a bunch of Teletubbies. Like you never hear about Ismailis doing anything wrong to anyone, at least not any more than other people. Like there are no, and I won't get too into it because I didn't want to get too into. I know this is about political philosophy. I didn't want to get too into geopolitics, but they are.
Yeah.
Them and the Ahmadis are just a bunch of Teletubbies. They are such nice people. But I guess that aside, back to the conversation. You have to be living that sort of honest, trusting life, which means you have to be receptive to being wounded. And this isn't just physical. Like we talk about being wounded, especially in a Christian context, and in the sort of like being physically persecuted for your beliefs. I'm going to show up and whip you. In practice, I mean, thank God for most of us in the West that does not happen. In other places, they are less lucky. God willing, we will see better things get better in our days, or the coming of the Messiah, which would be better yet. But that aside,
so do we live in a matrix?
Do we live in the Matrix? No.
No. Massive meta government organization that controls our minds.
I mean, that would be implausible for numerous reasons. If you meet some of these people, and I know for a lot of people you haven't maybe had that chance, but if you meet, you'll notice a lot of the stuff that looks like conspiracies coming together from the outside is actually just a lot of these people being friends. Like the wealthy it's a social class, right? They go to the same parties, they go to the same galas, they get shared invites. A lot of these people know each other, and so they're friends, and so they engage in actions together, but not in like some premeditated evil way. Nor is there a pan-national conspiracy. It's just shared class or social struggle. And then, of course, there's often dozens of differences between distinct groups that get totally lost when you're trying to forge them all together.
Mm-hmm.
Such as, say, the difference between radical feminism and intersectionality. Or even intersectionality and, like, critical animal theory, which thank God, does not have the widespread knowledge as some of the other sort of theories that have come out of academia. But every now and then I see it shuffled into intersectionality, and it's like, no, if you were really an intersectionality proponent, you wouldn't actually like a critical animal theorists. Because of the rather obvious mass murdery slant of the latter. That would be a pretty major problem to most intersectional theorists. So, and these are people who actually often know each other and go to the same conferences. So, and are both under the so-called left. So you can just imagine how many differences you start to get once you spread out from there. What there is, however, is a certain way of, I want to say accessing, but becoming aware of knowledge, which I won't say it's a matrix. Like, once you're there, it's partially looking from the outside, but it's looking from the outside in, or looking in from the outside, because you're still in the real world, and I think anyone can access this at any time. And it's not really ideological. It's just transformative. Like, it's a shift of the heart, not the adoption of a certain theory. And they're theories about reality, which might be right or wrong, mostly wrong. Like, I'm going to be rude here. I think most of the theories or ideologies I've discussed tonight are just false. But sorry, that aside, like the element of truth that they're all sort of distorting is in order to become aware of reality, you need to undergo that transformation of the heart. You need to risk wounding, and I guess I sort of cut off earlier for myself. Like, I don't mean you need to risk being beaten to death by an angry mob in the street for your religious beliefs. You need to risk being intellectually or spiritually or emotionally wounded as you go about your day-to-day life. Right? Maybe you will be permitted the honor of dying for the sake and for the glory of God, but more likely the cross you will bear is in 1,000 cuts as you try to, I want to say preach, but engage in the world. And I think my issue with, I mentioned earlier Paul Ricoeur, I guess we can sort of finish up by bringing him back here. The difference between what we call genuine and fake secret esoteric knowledge is not, well, it's partially, the transformation of character, but in practical terms, it's fake knowledge almost always follows the hermeneutics of suspicion, which is, I'm going to erase the apparent reality to give you the truth that hides just underneath, namely that the entire institution is the matrix / systemically controlled by Peruvo-normative white people or whatever, / pick your weird modern day ideology of choice, and only by peering at it with my superior outside knowledge can I see it. Whereas genuine esoteric knowledge starts with an engagement with the thing itself, an attempt to bring it to life. And you might still conclude it's full of crap, but you have brought it to life. It is no longer an idol. Right? Idol, means, the word means form, and it connotes a sort of dead object. It's now become an icon.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. No, true knowledge is Eastern Orthodoxy. No. No, you can think of this as like the whole. We have not discussed Genesis on stream, have we?
No.
I almost told. Okay, Book of Genesis, for those who don't know, and I'm going to speed run modern dozens of arguments in 15 seconds here, which is totally unfair, but Book of Genesis describes a failed idol consecration rite, right, in the first 3 chapters.
True.
Yes, I can send multiple sources on this. The best is, I cannot remember her name because it's really long. Catherine Becker Legs.
Yeah, I think she changed. I think she married and became Catherine McDowell, but Becker Leg. Yeah. She has 2, so you can find her stuff by 2 different names. But go on.
But yes, that'll be the best. The rite of idolatrous consecration, and I'm not using this as a pejorative here. I mean, as practiced by polytheists, was you craft the idol, you opened the idol's eyes, and then you opened its mouth. The Bible describes an abortive. It's the fallenness of man is that man, he was made in the image of God. He's an idol of God. That's the actual, like, he's a shadow of God is the Hebrew. That's what it means to be made in the image of God. We are living idols, and yet that consecration has been failed. It was systematically failed when man ate from the tree before his time, mucking up the right under his own will instead of under that of God, mucking up the right. And so the question, as religious thinkers or figures who want to live that hermeneutics of faith, is when we confront our fellow man, how can we bring the idol to life again? And if there's nothing else, I think we will end there.
All right. Good talk.
Perfect.
Thank you very much for joining us. This has been Wild Philosopher and Hound and Ryan talking about secret knowledge. Always remember that fairies are real, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Yes. If you're given the choice between the red pill or the blue pill, pick the fairy pill.
Yeah, pick the fairy pill. Have a good night.